Emma Claire Foley, Roots Action nuclear weapons policy expert, writer, and filmmaker. Her commentaries have been featured in Newsweek, NBC, The Guardian, several other international outlets. Tonight, Emma Claire is going to speak about the pressing concerns of nuclear war and nuclear weapons. Emma Claire, take it away.
Thanks, Ryan, and David, and thanks everybody for being here. This is really inspiring already, and I'm happy to join. I'm going to just give an overview of kind of where I see nuclear weapons fitting into our foreign policy picture today, and why I think it's especially important to do teach-ins on nuclear weapons issue and how knowing and not knowing about nuclear weapons has been so integral to the way that they've been sort of pushed to the front of our foreign policy over nearly 8 decades. As I've sort of hinted at already, nuclear weapons are really deeply integrated into the conflicts that we're seeing across the world that the United States is involved in various ways today. Even if they're not being used as weapons, they're used as justifications for non-nuclear military action. They're used as a way to kind of limit the possibilities, what's seen as possible or preferable in terms of how these conflicts might end or continue indefinitely, as it were. And what we've seen over and over is how having nuclear weapons isn't necessarily doesn't from the perspective of nearly anyone, living in a nuclear weapons country like the United States, which together with Russia has about 90% of all the nuclear weapons existing in the world today, it doesn't, make people safer in any ways. And in fact, actually can create situations where war is even more destructive, enduring, and difficult to resolve. So I think that one thing that we hear constantly from the sort of nuclear weapons boosters in various, sectors of industry and government and elsewhere is the kind of necessity of nuclear weapons on an indefinite timeline, which I think is really important to point out as a safety measure, when in fact we need to redefine them as something that makes us profoundly unsafe. Um, we why is it sorry, uh trying to think where did I want to go next with this? So why is it especially important to do a teach-in on nuclear weapons? I'll go there. Um, the way the nuclear weapons establishment is set up is very much reliant upon non-knowledge by the public of the most basic facts about nuclear weapons. One really telling example I can think of is when diffuse nuclear war activists who regularly protest test launches of intercontinental ballistic missiles at Vandenberg Space Force Base in California. We're waiting for months over the past few months for an announcement of a test, which usually comes only a few days before the test itself. And it was announced that it would take place on election night, right? So carefully and sort of obviously timed to happen when everyone's eyes were elsewhere, right? And where it could be passed off as this kind of inconsequential routine thing. So we see all the time, this is just one tiny example of a huge concerted effort to um, make nuclear weapons fade into the background. And when that's not possible, to present their maintenance and the expansion of nuclear arsenals that's ongoing seem like kind of a routine and necessary part of just, business as usual. And this has been really effective. I mean, a couple of polls come to mind when I think about this idea that we've consistently seen polling that shows that, more people believe that Iran possesses nuclear weapons than Israel, whereas the opposite is true. And polls out of Russia that I've seen as well that show that the majority of young people are not aware that nuclear weapons were used at the end of World War II. So the basic facts about these weapons, which threaten everyone on Earth with total destruction in the space of, less than an hour, the loss of kind of a basic awareness of facts about them has been really profound, and I think really does shape our politics around them. But what that means also is that even just a little bit of learning, a little bit of political education, and just a development of an understanding of the role these weapons play in our lives and our politics can be really transformative. And that's why I would encourage people who, if you're interested in learning more about this, to look into maybe organizing a teach-in around nuclear weapons so we can start to spread awareness of how much they are at the heart of the U.S. foreign policy project of today and how necessary it is to shift the status quo around nuclear weapons if we want to see this broader shift. Just a little bit about what Defuse Nuclear War is working on specifically to kind of make that shift, the issues we've been pushing on. One of our main issues is to get rid of these land-based nuclear missiles. I mentioned the Intercontinental Ballistic Missile, or the ICBM, which presents an especially profound vulnerability just because of the nature of the weapon itself. It basically creates the possibility of an accidental first strike at any moment. And the US has is now investing billions and billions of dollars in replacing these weapons, what's called modernization, but effectively is just a replacement, which is a program that extends beyond this weapon system and is actually happening in several countries all over the world, including Russia and China. But what it's doing is locking in nuclear weapons as the basis of the sort of global political system for decades to come. And this is something we really can't afford in terms of extending this risk that nuclear weapons pose at every moment. So getting rid of those weapons that are kind of the most dangerous of a crop of, very dangerous weapons, and that even the sort of like, hawkish nuclear weapons experts would agree like are not in any sense necessary to any vision of how the US runs its nuclear establishment is one of our sort of primary things we're pushing on. Other things we support, rejoining nuclear treaties that the US has pulled out of. There's one remaining arms control treaty with Russia that's set to expire next year now. And after that, this kind of the voices that are getting louder and louder to encourage more and more aggressive arms race, um, we'll have another thing that's not limiting them. We want to end policies that allow for the first use of nuclear weapons by enacting a no first use policy, which would prevent the United States from launching its nuclear weapons first as an offensive attack and crucially allow for changing the way it stores and uses its nuclear weapons to prevent an actual first strike. So really making that an actionable law, not just like, words. Um, Other than that, we've worked on taking nuclear weapons off of what's called hair trigger alerts. So again, making it harder to launch them at a moment's notice, making it harder to launch a nuclear weapon in response to faulty intelligence, or a false alarm of like an incoming attack, which is one of the main kind of risk factors that nuclear weapons pose. So that starting a nuclear war, for nothing. So there's a range of demands and there's other things we're working on as well. As I said, we see this as totally integral to kind of all the struggles we're working on today. Um, and yeah, again, I just want to encourage everyone one more time to sign up for a teach-in and to really ask the questions about how nuclear weapons work and how they fit into our foreign policy as it is today.
Thank you, Emma Claire. We do have several questions in from the attendees. Some argue that a country should have a minimum and maximum amount of nuclear weapons. Uh, I don't know about a minimum. I would say the minimum zero would be good, but uh, a maximum number of nuclear weapons. That is a real thing, though, with treaties. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, generally a treaty that's whose goal is to limit how many and what kind of nuclear weapons a country can have does impose a kind of maximum, at least on a certain type of nuclear weapon. Um, so I mean, there's definitely like as many ideas as you can, as there are people for ways you could organize nuclear weapons if you accept that nuclear weapons should exist. But I think, a vision of how we back down from this like very bad status quo, for lack of a more complex word, would and probably involve in some steps like those kind of limits. But the goal, of course, is to ratchet them down. And I just want to emphasize that there's not like a safe number of nuclear weapons, right? The
Right.
destruction that they can cause is so profound, um, and so like widespread that there's not a situation where you can sort of see, a sort of livable number of nuclear weapons. I think there's been a really effective, in certain ways, effort, especially since about 2022, to put forward this idea of like what's called a low yield nuclear weapon, where you know maybe there's like a nuclear weapon that's sort of not quite as bad as we've thought of it as, and like maybe if someone used one small nuclear weapon, it
Tactical,
wouldn't
yeah.
it wouldn't escalate. But I really want to put I always I try to push back on that, so that's just another point I think.
Yeah, and also that the United States has what, 5,000 nuclear weapons right now. Um, and so it's we could destroy the earth many times over. One more question. I have several more, but I think I only have time to get to one more. Um, this is from Robert. He says New Zealand doesn't buy the nuclear umbrella spin. How does a nuclear umbrella work?
um well, I guess it depends on what you mean by a nuclear umbrella, but I think that there's an implication in that phrase of this kind of just in case aspect of nuclear weapons and a kind of safety that they provide, which is again something that I think it's important to push back against, right? Like having nuclear weapons is a great reason, and probably the number one reason why a country might be hit with a nuclear weapon. And ha the promises that are made about things like missile defense or about deterrence, that they can effectively and indefinitely stave off a nuclear attack for any range of reasons. And secondly, that investing more in those things make them more effective, I think are both just totally fantastical.